When a paralyzed 5-year-old girl rolled her wheelchair across a busy street to give wilted dandelions to a intimidating Hell's Angel biker, she had no idea she was about to change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the thunderous roar of 200 motorcycles filled her quiet neighborhood as an army of leather-clad bikers arrived at her doorstep with a mission that would shock her entire school. But what could possibly drive hardened bikers to drop everything and protect one little girl? And how did a handful of flowers spark a brotherhood that defied every stereotype? The morning air hung thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine. As 5-year-old Emma Martinez adjusted the purple ribbons on her wheelchair wheels, her small hands already sticky with dew from the dandelions she'd been collecting since sunrise. The fabric of her favorite yellow sundress, the one with tiny butterflies that her father had sent from Afghanistan, clung to her legs in the humid heat, and she could taste the sweetness of honeysuckle on her tongue as she breathed in the summer morning. Her grandmother's voice drifted through the rusted screen door, calling her in for breakfast, the familiar sound of sizzling bacon and percolating coffee, creating a symphony of home that usually comforted her. But today, Emma was mesmerized by something across the street. A convoy of motorcycles pulling into Murphy's gas station, their chrome gleaming like liquid mercury in the early light, exhaust pipes rumbling with a deep bass that she felt in her chest. The lead rider was enormous. His leather vest stretched tight across shoulders that seemed to block out the sun itself. Tattoos crawling up his neck like dark vines, telling stories she couldn't read, but somehow understood were important. His boots hit the asphalt with the weight of someone who'd walked many hard roads, and the other bikers deferred to him with a respect that Emma recognized from watching her father interact with his fellow soldiers during their brief Skype calls. She'd never seen anyone so intimidating. Yet, something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost gentle, as he removed his riding gloves, finger by finger, reminded her of how her father used to handle her mother's china teacups before he deployed 8 months ago. As if he understood that beautiful things required careful hands. "Tank, you getting soft on us," one of the bikers called out, his voice cutting through the morning stillness like a rusty blade. But the giant man ignored him, his weathered hands surprisingly tender, as he removed his helmet with the same reverence other people reserved for prayer, revealing salt and pepper hair that caught the light like silver threads and eyes the color of storm clouds heavy with unshed rain. Emma watched him lean against his Harley Davidson, those same eyes distant and hollow, staring at something only he could see. And without thinking, without the fear that other children might have felt, she began rolling her wheelchair across the street, the familiar squeak of her left wheel marking time like a metronome, clutching her handful of wilted flowers, like a peace offering, like something precious that needed to be shared before it was too late. The other bikers fell silent as she approached, their conversation dying mid-sentence, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. But Tank noticed her first. This tiny girl in a wheelchair, fearless and smiling with 2 missing front teeth, holding up flowers that were already drooping in the heat, but somehow still beautiful in their imperfection. "These are for you," Emma said simply, her voice clear and sweet as church bells on Sunday morning. Tank's expression cracked open like an old photograph exposed to sunlight, and he knelt down slowly, his knees creaking with the sound of a man who'd lived hard and loved harder until they were eye to eye, and she could see the pain he carried like stones in his pockets. That evening, Tank sat alone in his garage workshop, surrounded by the familiar smells of motor oil and WD-40. Emma's wilted dandelions pressed carefully between the pages of his old photo album, right next to the last picture of Sarah in her hospital bed, bald and beautiful and brave, wearing the same fearless smile that Emma had given him just hours before. The fluorescent light above his workbench buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across the Tools he'd been using to rebuild a 1973 shovelhead engine. But his hands had gone still, trembling slightly as he traced his daughter's face in the photograph with one calloused fingertip. He couldn't shake the image of Emma's fearless approach, the way she'd rolled right up to him without hesitation, as if she instinctively knew he needed exactly what she was offering, not just flowers, but hope wrapped in innocence. Love disguised as dandelions. The garage door stood open to catch the evening breeze, and through it drifted the sounds of his neighborhood, settling into night, dogs barking in distant yards, the hum of air conditioners working overtime, the gentle splash of someone's sprinkler system painting rainbows in the dying light. But Tank's mind was across town, replaying his conversation with Murphy, the gas station owner who filled him in over bitter coffee that had gone cold while they talked. Emma faced daily torment at Roosevelt Elementary, Murphy had explained, his weathered face creasing with anger as he described children calling her wheels and excluding her from playground games with the casual cruelty that only children could master, making her eat lunch alone, while they whispered and pointed like she was something broken that might be contagious. Murphy's own granddaughter, Jessica, went to the same school and had witnessed Emma crying in the girls' bathroom more than once, scrubbing permanent marker off her wheelchair, where someone had written, "Freak," in black letters that seemed to burn into Tank's vision like a brand. The old man's hands had shaken with rage as he described finding Emma after school one day, sitting alone by the flagpole while other children ran past her to waiting buses, their laughter a sharp contrast to her silent tears that carved tracks through the dust on her cheeks like rivers of sorrow. Tank's hands clenched into fists as he imagined those cruel children, their words cutting deeper than any blade he'd faced in 2 tours of Vietnam. And suddenly he was remembering Sarah's last words to him, spoken through lips cracked with chemotherapy and fever, but still strong enough to make him promise, "Daddy, promise me you'll find someone else to protect when I'm gone. Promise me you won't let all your love just die with me, like some old engine nobody remembers how to fix." He'd made that promise through tears that had tasted like salt and regret, but until today, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone need him the way Sarah had needed him, to matter in someone else's world the way a father matters to his daughter. The Brotherhood would understand they were more than just bikers. They were veterans and fathers and grandfathers, men who'd seen enough cruelty in jungles and deserts and city streets to recognize when someone innocent needed defending, when someone pure needed protecting from a world that seemed designed to crush beautiful things. By midnight, Tank had made dozens of phone calls, his growly voice carrying across state lines like smoke signals as he reached out to chapters in neighboring cities, explaining about Emma and what she represented. Not just one little girl, but every child who'd ever been made to feel less than whole. Every innocent soul who'd ever needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. The rumble started as a distant whisper, like approaching thunder on a clear day. But by 7:30 in the morning, it had grown into something that shook windows and rattled coffee cups throughout the entire Maplewood neighborhood. Emma's grandmother, Rosa, was braiding Emma's hair when the sound became impossible to ignore, a deep, rhythmic roar that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of something massive and alive. Emma pressed her face to the living room window, her breath fogging the glass, and what she saw made her gasp so loudly that Rosa dropped the hairbrush. The street was filling with motorcycles, an endless stream of chrome and leather that stretched as far as the eye could see. Riders dismounting with military precision, their boots hitting asphalt in synchronized harmony. Tank stood at the center of it all. But he looked different, somehow taller, more purposeful, wearing a fresh leather vest that gleamed like armor in the morning sun. Behind him stood men and women whose faces told stories of hard roads and harder choices. Their patches displaying names like Iron Thunder, Desert Wolves, and Steel Brotherhood. But their eyes held the same gentle intensity that Emma had seen in Tank's face the day before. Rose's hand trembled as she reached for the phone. But Tank was already at their front door, holding a bouquet of perfect white roses that must have cost more than Rosa made in a week. "Ma'am, we're here for Emma," he said respectfully, his voice carrying none of the menace Rosa had expected. "We heard she might need an escort to school today." Emma's eyes went wide as she took in the impossible scene. Nearly 200 bikers standing in formation on her quiet street, their machines gleaming like a metallic river that flowed around cars and mailboxes and fire hydrants. Neighbors had emerged from their houses, some recording with their phones, others simply staring in disbelief at this leather-clad army that had materialized to protect one small girl. Tank knelt beside Emma's wheelchair, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her into a custom-sided car that someone had somehow acquired and decorated with purple ribbons, her favorite color. "You ready to show those school bullies what real friendship looks like, princess?" he asked. And Emma nodded so enthusiastically that her pigtails bounced. The convoy moved through Maplewood like a parade of guardian angels, their engines creating a symphony that announced to the world that Emma Martinez was not alone, had never been alone, would never be alone again. Traffic stopped, pedestrians paused on sidewalks, and even the morning radio DJ interrupted his playlist to report on the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in 20 years of broadcasting. Emma felt the wind in her hair and the rumble of Tank's Harley beneath her, and for the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about the cruel words or the lonely lunches or the tears she'd cried in bathroom stalls. She was thinking about how sometimes miracles come wrapped in leather and arrive on two wheels, announced by the thunder of engines and carried by the hearts of strangers who choose to become family. When the massive convoy pulled into the circular drive at Roosevelt Elementary, the entire school seemed to hold its breath. Teachers pressed against classroom windows, children ran to the fence, and even Principal Williams emerged from his office to witness what would later be called the most extraordinary thing in 40 years of education. Emma sat tall in her sidecar as Tank carefully helped her out. The 200 bikers forming a protective corridor that stretched from the curb to the school's front entrance, their helmets removed in a show of respect that transformed them from intimidating strangers into gentle giants. The bullies who had tormented Emma Tyler Richardson, who'd ridden freak on her chair, and Madison Cooper, who'd convinced other kids not to sit with her at lunch, stood frozen in amazement, their mouths agape as they realized that the quiet girl they dismissed had somehow summoned an army. Tank walked beside Emma's wheelchair, carrying her backpack decorated with butterfly patches, his massive frame somehow making her look not smaller but more precious, like something worth protecting. "Remember what you taught me yesterday, little angel," he said quietly as they approached the school doors, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed an old biker that kindness is the strongest force in the universe. Don't you ever let anyone make you forget how powerful your heart is." Emma looked up at him, then back at the sea of leather and chrome that had gathered in her honor. And for the first time in months, she rolled through those school doors with her head held high, her shoulders straight, and her smile bright enough to light up the darkest corners of the hallway. The other children parted like waves as Emma passed, their expressions transformed from mockery to wonder. And even Tyler Richardson, the worst of her tormentors, stepped forward with something that might have been shame in his eyes. "Emma, I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice barely audible above the distant rumble of engines. "I didn't know. I mean, I never thought." But Emma just smiled, the same fearless smile she'd given Tank the day before, and rolled past him toward her classroom, leaving forgiveness hanging in the air like morning mist. Outside, the sound of 200 motorcycles starting up in perfect unison filled the air like a promise, a reminder that would echo Through the halls of Roosevelt Elementary for years to come. That kindness, once freely given, creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can imagine. As Tank rode away with his brothers, Emma's wilted dandelions still pressed in his vest pocket, he thought about Sarah and how proud she would be. How she would have loved this brave little girl who understood that flowers and smiles can heal wounds that words alone never could. And Emma settling into her desk as her classmates gathered around her with new curiosity and respect realized that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who show up exactly when you need the most. Riding on thunder and wearing leather armor. Carrying hearts big enough to change the